And again, with the stock dividend, the corporation sends out additional shares of stock. And they're in proportion to the number of shares that each shareholder owns, so you don't lose any proportional value. There was a large stock, there were a small stock dividend. And that was less than 25%, less than or equal to 25%. And of course, that was at market value. There was a large stock dividend, and that was greater than 25%, and that's at par. And again, the reason FASB decided to do it this way is that market value is really the one that you'd want, but it would be so destabilizing if you had a huge one. They thought par would just be less disruptive. So let's do a couple of examples here. So in this one example, they have 100,000 shares. They're going to issue a 2% stock dividend. Okay, so that means it'll be 20,000 shares. Okay. And the market value is $10. And of course, now this will be small, right? The market value is $10. And $10, of course, comes to $20,000. Now this particular stock has a
200,000?
Oh, I'm sorry, just a second. So 2% would be 2,000 shares, okay? Times $10 would be $20,000, and it has $1 par. So the journal entry would be then December 31, retained earnings will be debited for 20,000. Common stock distributable will be credited for 2,000, and of course this will eventually be transferred to common stock, the date of issue, right? And then $18,000 is a plug figure, and that will be paid in capital in excess of par. The result is that current stockholders now own more shares of stock. Their proportional ownership remains the same, and the market value of the stock is transferred from retained earnings to contributed capital. Okay, and of course that makes sense because now it's in the hands of the shareholders. Yeah.
Shouldn't it be 200,000?
Well, now, it's 100,000 shares, right? 2% would come to 20,000. $10 a share is the market value. That would be 20,000, right?
20,000 times 10 is 200,000.
It's 2,000
So it's well, this is 2,000, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because there's 100,000 shares outstanding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I should thank you for your question, because you know what, I'm on your side of the table, and it just, you know what I mean? Man, just, yeah, I can't move on until I get my answer to the question, so be sure to, thank you. All right, does that make sense? Okay, now, why don't I do quick study 13-9, and that's on page 536. Now I'm going to turn this camera forward. And be sure to yell if you guys got a question on any of that. Is there if there's a mysterious word? down here toward the bottom, I'm gonna fold this in half because it'll lay more nicely. Here's 13-9. Now, what it says is, all right, here it is. So what it says is, now, the stockholders' equity section of the Zachman Company balance sheet as of April 1st follows. On April 2nd, so this was as of April 1st, common stock $5 par, 375,000 shares authorized, 150,000 shares issued and outstanding. So, and again, the way this works is authorized means that's the total amount they can sell. They've sold 150,000 and they have not bought any back in the form of treasury stock. And we'll get into treasury stock later on today, okay? All right, and so the way this works is it's $5 par, so 5 times 150 comes out to 750,000. Because here's the amount of shares that were sold, $5 par, this is what it is. Here's the contributed capital, so this is the amount that when they sold it, this is the total amount above par that they sold it as. Here's the retained earnings as of this date, and don't forget retained earnings. Is everybody okay with retained earnings? You want an explanation?
Please.
All right, here, let me show you here. As far as an explanation goes, and the best thing to do is, let me put it up here on the board and I won't have to move the camera. Here's the retained earnings. What retained earnings represents? It represents the profit that's been left in the business since its inception. So let me kind of back up just a bit. I hope I'm not giving you more details than you want, but I think this may make it clear. So here you have revenue, and you have expense. Now, what we have done in 201 is we closed the income summary. And then, if you close revenue and you close expenses, that will then find what? It'll find the net income or net loss, and that is then transferred to retained earnings. And dividends come out of retained earnings. So dividends are to a corporation as withdrawals are to a sole proprietorship. You're passing capital onto the owners, right? So what retained earnings represent is profit that's been left in the business since its beginning. So profit left in business. Okay? So it's increased by a net income, decreased by a net loss, decreased by dividends. Now, don't be surprised. Now, what income summary does is it finds your net income or net loss, and then transfers to the retained earnings. Its purpose is to keep details out of the retained earnings account. Many computerized systems close directly to retained earnings. The net effect is the same. The only thing is, if you use the income summary account, then when you go to retained earnings, you have fewer details. It's easier to see what's going on. But all it does is to keep details out of the retained earnings account. That makes sense? Yeah, Mike?
What does that top portion say?
It says profit left in the business. Yeah. Now, by the way, you know when I write these things, when I'm up close at a slant, they really look cool. And when I watch them on the videotape, they look, it looks good anyway. But it's profit left in the business since its inception. Okay?
So it's basically the same thing we were doing with the sole proprietorship. Instead of it being called capital,
Mm-hmm.
the capital accounts, and the
Mm-hmm.
withdrawals, it's retained earnings and dividends.
Yep, it's exactly. It does, yep, it's exactly right. And by the way, everything works the same as it does with the sole proprietorship, it's just more complicated. Because in addition to what we used to call the capital account, you have the contributed capital, so it'd be the common stock and the in excess of par. And don't be surprised to see this not included, because its purpose is just to keep details out of either the capital or the retained earnings. Now, by the way, for what it's worth, you know, in sole proprietorship, you'll see some of them having retained earnings. like QuickBooks has a retained earnings account and for a sole proprietorship. Yeah, and again, it does the same things as account, but just don't be surprised if you see it. Yeah, and this is what it does. All right, now, what questions are there? Does this make sense? And so what it is this represents profit that's been left in the business since its inception. So a net loss will decrease it, and net income will increase it, and dividends will decrease it. And so now, what happened here is when we had a stock dividend, we transferred money from this to contributed capital. Okay, and so contributed capital it has two parts. Okay, it will have common stock, and that's legal capital, it's par, and it will have in excess of par. Now I'll just put in excess of par, it has a longer name, but this will move us along. And what it does when you have a stock dividend, it transfers money from this to that. And it makes sense because people have the stock in their hand, right? And so this is a stock dividend.
Is there a difference between the two different dividends, or is that just an
Oh, yeah.
explanation?
Oh, no, there is. This is the cash dividend we studied earlier. And this is where the stockholders who own the business, they get cash. Okay, and when it comes out of retail, and they get cash. Here, all they get is a piece of paper.
Okay.
But, I hate to say that, because a piece of paper, this is, that's important stuff. So anyway, but what happens in this is they get a piece of paper, but because they have the piece of paper in their hand, it shows up as contributed capital. And it's moved out of retained earnings into, and that's the rationale behind it. That sound good? Sky, how you doing? Does that make sense? Okay, all right, sound good. Okay.
So what's the in excess of par? You said it's two parts.
Well, contributed capital, right? So when you sell stock, you multiply par times each share that goes into contributed capital, and the amount above par goes into excess of capital.
Okay. So it's another account type.
Well, yeah, again, and again, it's the amount, when you sell a share of stock, so suppose par was $10, and you sold it for 15, 10 would go to par, and 5 would go into in excess of par. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. Okay, now, so in this particular problem, so what they're saying is now, all right, so on April 2nd, they distributed a 10% stock dividend. That'll be a small stock dividend, so it'll be at market value. The company's per share value on April 2nd was $25, that's the market, prior to the dividend. Prepare the stockholders' equity section immediately after the stock dividend. So let's kind of do some journal entry first. So back here, what we have is we have on April 2nd, we make this big. So here we have April 2nd, and that's this, when they issued the stock dividend. When they issued the stock dividend, what will happen on this thing is what we have here is there's 150,000 shares outstanding, right? It's a 10%, those are shares, 10% stock dividend at $25 per share. That means that retained earnings will be decreased by $375,000 because here's the number of shares, okay? Here's the stock dividend, so 10% of that times the market value, so this is the stock dividend. This is the market value. Okay? So on April 2nd then, what we have is retained earnings will be debited for $375,000. In other words, it's decreased by the market value of the stock dividend. Now, common stock, which is legal capital, it will be increased by par. So in this case, this is $10 par, right? So 10,
$5.
Says
$5 par. Okay, thanks. So, $5 par. So in this case, what we'll have is, we'll have 10% of this times $5. So in this case, it will be 150,000 shares, okay, times 10% times $5. So here's the total shares outstanding, 10% stock dividend, 5% per share. That comes to 75,000. And so common stock will be credited for 75,000. Then if we have 375 minus 75, 300 goes into contributed capital in excess of par.
Where do you get the,
I'll be with you just 1 second. Let me get this written down here. And I'm sorry, where did I get what?
the 150,000 up in the top left corner?
Right here.
Oh, okay.
And Jonathan, so I'm giving you a good answer. What it is you know, it's the number of shares that
Yeah, that
are
makes sense
outstanding.
now. I was looking at the right side all the way to the right, the prices instead of the actual
Okay.
shares.
Yeah, yeah.
Where's that 352,500 come from?
I'm sorry, 352,000.
Paid capital in
Oh, I
excess
see.
of
It's
par.
the $20 times
The answer is, it's a
the
given.
150,000.
And the reason, where it came from, was when they sold these 150,000 shares. The total amount that they were sold for was these two added together. What would that be, 1,02,500? So what they did is they sold these 150,000 shares for $1,02,500. 750,000 went into par, was par, and the remainder went into above par. And Justin, sometimes it's easier to see if you write out the numbers. If you're satisfied with that, fine. If you want me to see me work through it, I'll be glad to.
I think I'm good.
You good? Okay. And that's what the original sale was. That's where the numbers came from. Or you can also just take it as a given. Okay? All right. Now, what happens with this then is, here's what the stockholders' equity section will look like afterwards. So afterwards, now common stock, actually, I think let me just put this up here rather than write it out. I think that you guys, so now this is after the fact. So after the fact, what it did is, let's see, I'll put this here. So after the fact, common stock increased by 75,000. So it went from 750,000, increased by 75, that's this number here. So the ending amount is 825,000. Contributed capital, it started out at 352,500, it increased by 300,000, so now it's up to 652,500. The total contributed capital are those two added together. Retained earnings started at 633,000, and it decreased by 375,000. Now it's down to 258,000. And the contributed capital plus the retained earnings, here's the total stockholders' equity. Now, let me check with you guys. I kind of walked through that real quick. You guys want me to add the numbers? Where are you at? You pretty much got it? Yeah, Gene?
Why do you decrease retained earnings?
Okay, you want to like the concept behind it?
Yeah.
Here's the deal. Retained earnings, contributed capital is how much people have invested, right? Okay, retained earnings represents profit that's been left in the business, right? So, when we did this stock distribution, we increased contributed capital, okay? And so what happens is when you increase the capital, it had to come from somewhere, it came from retained earnings. Okay, and so now there's more capital in the stockholders' hands.
Thank you.
All right.
The contributed capital and the paid-in capital is the same count.
Exactly. You know, this book, it's really a good book. one of the few irksome things it does is at this stage, they have the same account name, they have 3 different account titles for the same account, and I wish they didn't do that. Because, yeah, I just wish, at this point in time, one account name for the whole chapter. Once you get it down, call it anything you like. But no, they keep naming it different things, and they're totally different names, So, and that irks me, because the homework will use different names than the textbook. Yeah, I agree. But listen, you guys, all I can say is, if you would have suffered through some of those crappy textbooks like I have, you wouldn't complain. No, seriously. You know what I mean? You'd be really happy with a few of these irksome details. Okay.
Can you put that, I don't know if you're referring to.
Sure.
The answers back up there?
Sure.
Thank
All right. And you guys are okay with that? Now, a large stock dividend, that's a real easy one because it's just done at par. So I'm going to move this camera around, turn on the light, and make sure you guys got all the notes taken that you want to take. And we'll do a large stock dividend, which is at par. And then we'll get on to preferred stock. Now, where you guys at? You guys done with that? Okay, everybody doing good?
Almost.
you.
And you're lost? Don't say that. Who said that? Oh,
So,
was that almost? Oh, okay, I thought I heard I'm lost. I shouldn't say don't say that. I don't mean to discourage good questions, but it's not something I want to hear. All right. And for you guys at home watching this thing, we're waiting for people to finish taking notes here. Yeah.
Right, so the question I have is, I'm comparing the two.
Okay.
So I know you just went over the account names being the same, but I kind of
Sure.
spaced out for a second. So the paid in capital in excess of par value, the common stock on there, the 352,500,
Uh-huh.
is now equivalent to the total contributed capital? Or the contributed capital in excess of par value? Which number is it? It's the contributed capital in excess of par. And
Yeah.
652,000?
Why did you have
No, one of like 300,000.
Hey, listen, see if this is helpful. I'm not sure what your question is, but see if this is helpful.
Okay.
What we did is we moved money from here
Right,
to these two,
right,
is what we did, right?
right.
And so it turned out to be in the amount, basically what it was a 10% stock dividend.
Okay.
So 10%, so.
So 75,000 went to the common stock, the top
Exactly,
one, okay? And
exactly.
then underneath it, the 300,000 went there.
Exactly.
Okay,
And then this went down, and then
Right.
retained earnings went down correspondingly.
okay.
So the equity stays.
And the equity stayed exactly the same. The equity stayed exactly the same. In fact, 1,735,500, 1,735,000. What did change now is there's more in the hands of the stockholders when they got the additional stock. That's what changed. Yeah, they own more of the company.
So anything that says in excess of par value, is that going to be the same account?
Well, yeah, now these are the same account, right?
Right. it's
It
just-
is, did they? No. I didn't get, that's what you're talking about,
Yeah,
right,
I was
Ted?
like kind of confused as
You
well.
got, and that's the irks, but listen, you
Yeah.
guys, if you would have worked through some of these crappy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd be thankful for it, because man, it can, yeah. Now, you know what happened here, is one person writes the questions, and another person writes the textbook.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the third name? Because I see the contributed capital in excess of par, then there's the paid in capital in excess of
Well,
par.
let me seven things. So contributed capital, paid in capital, excessive par. I can't think of one offhand, but
Okay.
it basically it's the same words.
Okay.
Yeah. But I wish they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, you guys doing good? So let's go ahead now. With a large stock dividend, it's essentially the same process, except you just have it at par. So I'm going to move this over here. So now it's just at par. So in this case, what they did is, in this particular example, there's 50,000 shares outstanding. Okay, $1 par. Okay, 40% stock dividend. Okay, and it was selling for $8 a share. Now, what counts is the par, not the market price. Okay? So in this case, 40% of this equals 200,000 shares times $1 par equals $20,000. Okay, just as before, so on December 31, that's the date it happened, retained earnings is debited for $20,000, and common stock distributable is credited for $20,000. And of course, this will be transferred to common stock. And again, it's the same thing we did before. The only difference is it's at par. And when it's at par, it moves from retained earnings to the value of par just moves from retained earnings to contributed capital.
I have a question. It's not
Sure.
stupid,
I'm
But,
going to take a minute and get a darker marker here. What's that?
so retained earnings is the increase.
The opposite, it's being
Being
decreased.
decreased.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because what we're doing here now is contributed capital increases because the stockholders own more of the corporation. They got more stock. And where does the money come from? It comes from retained earnings.
Okay.
So we're moving it from here to there. Okay.
Thank you.
And again, the only difference is now it's at par, and when it's at par, there's no paid in, no matter what you want to call it, there's no contributed capital in excess of par or paid in capital in excess of par. It's all par.
All right.
Okay. All right, does that make sense? All right. Now, let's get into a stock split. Now, here's what happens with a stock split is, normally, when they say at 2%, normally when you buy stocks, you buy them in round lots, which is either 1,000 shares or 100 shares, right? So when we have a really successful company, the price just keeps increasing, and then 100 times the big number is a really big number, and people can't buy round lots, right? It makes it impossible just to trade it, the practicality of trading it. So what you want to do is you want to bring the price of a share down. So suppose you have a 2-for-1 stock split. You call all your stock back in. If it's 2-for-1, you divide the par in half. Like if it was $10 before, you divide it in half, and reissue twice as many shares to each owner, but now with half the par. Okay? So now, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if it's a 2-for-1 stock split, you want to lower the price of each share, right? And the way you do that is you call the shares in, reissue them, and what you reissue is at half the par. If it was 3-to-1, you'd reissue 3 stocks at 1/3 of the par. Now the contributed capital, nothing changes, other than you do record in the, when you have that stockholders' equity section, that's the only place you just state there's a difference par. Now what happens with that is practically, if you own this stock, it's a good sign. It means the company was really prosperous. It means the value of the stock went up. And so it just represents a good track record. And so, I'll be right with you, Jonathan. Suppose you paid $50 a share before the split. Now, it may be worth $26 a share. In other words, it would be worth slightly more than half. Because don't forget, the market price is a psychological thing. It's not based on anything but what somebody's willing to pay for it. And this company has a good track record, and that will give a little bit of a bump. And maybe a 26-to-1, it'll be some sort of a bump. It'll be a small bump. Jonathan?
Do they ever do it where they like take away some of your stocks and they to increase the price?
Yeah, they can do that. We'll get into that. Preferred is normally where that's done. And so, you know, first of all, you can have reverse split, okay, that'll do the same thing. Suppose everything's just been really bad, right? And so now they're selling for a penny a share, so bad show. So you do a reverse split. You call them back in, send out half as many that have twice the par. Yeah, I can do it. Or you can have, yeah. All right. So that's the stock split. And the only difference is the par is cut down half-third, depending on whether it's 2 for 1 or 3 for 1. That's just reported in the stockholders' equity section. Let's get on to preferred stock. Okay? Now, preferred stock, generally what it does, it has a preference to dividends. And it has a preference to assets. So what this means is that when you buy preferred stock, normally it will come with a stated dividend rate. Either a percent of par, so normally they have a stated dividend rate. Okay, either a percent of par or a dollar amount. And of course, in this chapter, it will be a percent of par. Okay? So what it means is the fact that if a dividend is declared by the board of directors, the preferred stockholders get their dividend first. If there's anything left over, it goes to the common stockholders. If there's nothing left over, the common stockholders don't get anything. Okay? That's the preference to dividends. Now, suppose the business liquidates. The preferred shareholders have preference, but their claim is higher to the assets. Okay? So upon liquidation, they get paid first. So you sell the assets, you pay off the creditors, you pay off the preferred stockholders, what's left over goes to common stockholders. Okay? Okay. And it normally has no voting rights. Okay, so normally it has no voting rights.
Is that because it's not mutual agency?
It's not what?
Mutual agency?
No, the mutual agency, that's the thing, that's only for partnerships. And what that says is any one of the partners acting in the normal course of business binds the partnership.
Okay.
Okay, any one of them can sign a contract. Okay. What this says is the fact that when, don't forget, common stock elects the board of directors, right?
Right.
These people don't have a vote.
Okay.
Okay. Another way of looking at it, if you're an investor, this is more like lending money than it is investing.
Okay.
Because when you invest by common stock, you're an owner, you vote for the board of directors, and that sort of thing. If you're a preferred shareholder, you have no vote, but you get more the equivalent of a percentage return. Like, so you lend them money, you get interest.
Mhm.
As from an investor standpoint, it's more like debt, more like lending money than buying the stock. And it's much more secure, because if the business does go out of business, you have to sell the assets, you pay off the creditors, pay off the preferred shareholders, and then the common shareholders. So there's less risk. Okay. All right. So let me do quick study 13. Now, by the way, this can also be convertible. And what that means is, the shareholder can say, I want to, the shareholder has the right, if it's convertible, the shareholder has the right to convert their preferred stock into common stock. Okay, at their choice. Okay, and it can also be callable. And callable means that the company can buy back preferred stock if they would choose to. And Jonathan, this is kind of what you're referring to. So they can buy back the stock if they choose to. Okay? So it's convertible means the holder of the stock, of the preferred stock, can choose to have it converted into common stock. If it's callable, the company can buy it back whether the stockholder likes it or not. Okay. All right, so let me do quick study. I'll put it here on the board. Let me do quick study 13-6, and you'll find that on page 536. All right, let me put this up here. Make it more readable. All right. So quick study 13-6. There it is. Here's 13-6. Okay. All right. So here's the way this reads. It says, prepare the journal entry to record the Stepan Company's issuance of 12,000 shares at $50 par, 6% cumulative preferred for $75 cash per share. So what it will do is the par value will be 12,000 times $50, and then 12,000 times $25 will go into paid-in capital in excess of par. Okay? So let me put this up here. So the way this works is, so what we're going to do is we're going to debit cash. And I'm going to move this up here. Let me just do this. So if we have 12,000 shares, right? And we're going to sell them for $75 a share. That means we're going to have $900,000 in cash. And if we have 12,000 and a $50 par, this is market, and a $50 par, that means we'll have 600,000 okay, in preferred stock. And then 75 minus 50 is $25. That'll be the amount above par. And again, it's 12,000 shares. Well, actually, there's a simpler way of doing it. Then we'll just take the difference. That 300,000 will be in excess of par.
Is that preferred stock or common stock?
A preferred stock. Okay? Does that make sense? So, does that make sense? So, what we're talking about, this whole thing is preferred stock. And I think the best answer to your question is, it's the same, it's a parallel process to common stock. Okay? So, here's what the journal entry will look like. And let me put this journal entry up there and see who has a question. So cash will be debited for $900,000, and that's how much they sold it for. That's 12,000 shares at $75,000 a share. Preferred stock, $50 par. Will be credited for $600,000, and then paid-in capital in excess of par preferred stock will be credited for $300,000. So it's the exact same process as we had with common stock when you sell it. Okay,
So do you have to distinguish between paid-in capital excess of par for preferred stock and common stock?
yep,
Okay.
for the exact same reasons. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Now, assuming the facts in part one is a year-end dividend, what is the amount of dividend paid for shareholders? Well, in this case, let's go back and take a look at it. So what they have here, it's a 6% stock, right? So in this case, it'll be $50 par. Okay. Per share. This is par, this is per share. Times 6% times 12,000 shares. That means that 36, so if a dividend is declared by the, and I'll put this up here so it's easier. If a dividend is declared by the board, 36,000 goes to the preferred shareholders. If there's anything above that, anything left over, it goes to common shares. Does that make sense of that figure?
Say that one more time?
Sure. What this says is that the board of directors declares a dividend. And let's say they declare a $40,000 dividend, right? Well, 36,000 goes to the preferred shareholders. The remaining 4,000 goes to the common shareholders. If they declare a $36,000, it goes to all of it goes to the preferred, none to the common.
I get what you're saying.
What's that?
I understand that.
Okay. And Angelica, you said you understand it?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so it's, they can declare any amount that they want to pay, it doesn't matter. If it goes over a certain amount, it gets paid the common stock.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. And again, sure, don't forget they have the preference for dividends, but they have a cap on their preference.
Okay.
And you'll see it sometimes as a dollar amount,
Mhm.
sometimes as a percent of par.
Okay.
In this textbook, it's all a percent of par. And that's the way it's figured. And then, of course, in this case, this is, so then what they do,
So, I'm sorry,
you know,
the 36,000 gets broken down into 12,000 shares, so
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
$3 per share.
well, it'll be, it will be $3 per share. Because it'll be 6% of $50, which is $3.
Okay.
So basically, you're right, every share of preferred stock will get $3.
Okay.
So if you own one share, you get $3.
Okay.
10 share, $30. Okay, and we'll do that. Okay, you guys doing good? All right, sounds good. Okay, let's do this. Let's turn to extras. So now, while we're on the subject, when they issue a dividend, I'm going to move this back here. When you buy the preferred shares, sometimes the dividend will be cumulative and sometimes it'll be non-cumulative. Okay? So let me turn on the lights so it's easier to read. And let's go over cumulative and non-cumulative. So, and again, we're talking about preferred stock, right? We're still back to preferred stock. So if it's cumulative, what that means is dividends in arrears. Must be paid before common stock gets any dividend. So the example we had here where it came to 36,000, suppose the board of directors said, let's give a dividend of 30,000. Well, the 30,000 will go, all of it will go to the preferred shareholders, right? But they're short 6. Next year, the preferred shareholders have to get the current dividend of 36. So if they had, so what it is they had if they had declared a dividend of $42,000, 36 would go for the current year, which would be next year, and the remaining 6 would be from arrears in this year. Yeah, Justin?
You said dividend and appears, is that what that said?
Sure. Dividend arrears that are, they're behind on it.
Arrears?
Arrears. Dividends that haven't been paid from the previous year. So the example I have here, so in this year, 36,000 is what the preferred shareholders are due, right? If they have a $30,000 dividend, there'll be 6 in arrears. And I appreciate, anybody have a question on that, because I'm there, okay? And then, until that $6,000 is paid off, the common stock will not get anything. Okay? Now, if it's non-cumulative, there's no arrears. So if it's non-cumulative, there's no arrears. So let me give you an example here. Let's do this. Let's do exercise 13-8. Find that on page 539. Okay? Why don't I do 2011? You guys do the rest. And then, so in this case, it's exercise 539. Okay? And it's exercise 13-8. So here's what they have, and I'll do the first year. So let me put this on the board, and I'll show you how this works. Okay. So, here's the way it works. You know what, actually, this may be the best way of doing it. So what happens here now? The weighted outstanding stock consists of 40,000 shares of non-cumulative 7.5% preferred stock with a $10 par. All right? Also, 100,000 shares of common stock with a $1 par. During the first 4 years of operation, the corporation declared and paid the following total cash dividends. So 2011, they paid $10,000. 2012, the board declared $24,000 in dividend. 2013, $100. 2014, $196. Determine the amount of dividends paid each year to each of the 2 classes of stockholders, preferred and common. Also compute the total dividends paid for each stock for the 4 years combined. So let's do this. So in the first year, what we'll have, so in 2011, here's what we'll have. Okay, so this will be 2011. And we'll have preferred, in this column, we'll have one column.